Today's episode comes with a serious trigger warning. We are talking about suicide, so if you or anyone you know needs help, please get it. You can reach the befrienders by phone or email 24 hours a day, or call a friend. Recently, videos of a man threatening to end his life in a mall went viral. After he was rescued by firemen, he was handed over to the police. Why is attempting suicide still a crime, and yet goading a person to their death, as many online viewers did, not a crime? Believe it or not, attempting suicide is a criminal offence. Under Section 309 of the Penal Code, those who attempt suicide can be punished with a jail sentence of up to 1 year, a fine, or both. Historically, laws that criminalize suicide comes from the religious concept that only God has the right to decide when someone dies. Therefore, making it a crime was considered to be a deterrent. But is it really?
Criminalizing suicide, from the literature, there is no evidence that it acts as a deterrent to prevent somebody from attempting suicide beyond not being a deterrent. Criminalizing suicide can actually have a very negative effect, marginalizing further people who are in distress from actually trying to access very much needed help from mental health services.
And the laws were created at a time when we really didn't understand mental health. But now we know a lot more.
Suicide behavior in general is complex. There is no one causative factor, but we can look at it from the biological, psychological, and social factors. Someone might have, say, genetic vulnerability to suicide, life adversities, for example, trauma in early childhood, acute crises, financial crises, unemployment, and just a very non-conducive living environment, lack of social support. So these are some of the things that may put someone at risk for suicide.
We tend to think of suicide as an issue far removed from us and our loved ones, but that's just not true. It's more common than you think. The Health Ministry estimates that 10 Malaysians die by suicide every day. Recent data suggests that the number of attempts is at least 15 times higher. That means 150 people trying to end their lives daily. 80% of suicide attempts are due to mental health problems like depression. And our mental health is just getting worse. 4.2 million Malaysians are affected. Also worrying is the increase in young people who are affected, which in 2016 was 1 in every 5 students. This is why there have been fresh calls for the law to be removed. The Malaysian Crime Prevention Foundation's senior vice chairman said, people who attempt suicide due to mental illness must be given psychiatric treatment or rehabilitation. Criminalizing depressed persons or those who are mentally sick is inhumane, unthinkable, and unacceptable. MPs Hannah Yeoh and Wong Chen have also made statements in support of this, calling the law archaic. But as a population, we can be pretty brutal towards suicidal people. This type of comments have a potentially lethal effect on a vulnerable person.
In my opinion, that's really detrimental. Someone who is in imminent risk of suicide, I think it's very important for us to understand that it's a myth to think that he or she has completely, ultimately decided to die by suicide. What we know is that it is an ambivalent position that a person who is about to attempt suicide, and it's that ambivalence that we have to capitalize on. So the idea is not to encourage the person further to suicide, but I think that's the perfect opportunity. Instead of saying negative things and jeering him on, there is such a golden opportunity to help this person.
What actually happens is that this distressed person is handed over to the police.
It starts, of course, with the person being arrested by the authorities and handed over, usually to the police force. And this is where the discretion of the investigating officer comes into play. He has a choice, I suppose, whether he wishes to take this further and have the gentleman or lady's case referred to the prosecution. The other option, which is more recommended option, is to have that person handed back to the family members. If you go by the general reading of how cases are prosecuted, we don't see many, hardly any actually, individuals being prosecuted for attempting to take their own lives.
Even though it rarely happens, it has been known to happen.
And here is where I would like to again highlight that when somebody's in an acute suicidal crisis, somebody who's crying out for help in that distress, it's unthinkable that you would dangle this punishment as a deterrent and say that you're going to prison. Emotional distress is not best dealt with a prison sentence.
And while some worry that decriminalizing suicide would mean that the police lose their power to detain or compel a person to get help, this isn't the case.
We actually already have laws in place in the Mental Health Act that if someone is suspected to have mental health issues that puts the individual at risk of their own safety, our police as well as our registered social workers have the mandate to actually bring this person to mental health services or health services in general, to a hospital, for example.
But are our hospitals providing the help that's needed? Well, Malaysia has only 360 registered psychiatrists in the whole country. That's one psychiatrist for every 200,000 Malaysians, well below the 1 to 10,000 ratio recommended by WHO.
But I would like to highlight that it's not just this figure that's important, it's also the distribution that's important. A lot of psychiatrists are centered around the urban areas, for example, the Federal Territory in Kuala Lumpur, in the Klang Valley. I think we need to collaborate, the mental health experts locally with expertise from abroad, and work and support our frontline responders and not just train them how to respond, but we need to take care of them because it's very traumatic to have to deal with this day in, day out. When somebody's in crisis, what do we have in terms of acute crisis interventions? For Malaysia now, it's quite hospital-based, and yes, we have some community mental health services, but I would love to see specialized crisis mobile units who actually go to a person in crisis and not wait for the person to come. Now, beyond having just specialist mental health services, I think the point that is very important to highlight that suicide prevention is everyone's business.
Which brings us back to bystanders. Earlier this year in America, Michelle Carter was given jail time after her boyfriend died by suicide. Why? Because she had been encouraging him to do it via text. What about Malaysian law? Can people be prosecuted for encouraging someone to commit suicide?
We have sufficient legislation governing aiding and abetting a crime. So if, as I said earlier, attempting suicide remains a crime, anyone aiding and abetting a person to commit that crime can be charged. But if you take away the principal crime of attempting suicide, then a person cannot be abetting that act at all. So persons like that would not be able to be prosecuted and would escape altogether. And I think we can learn from models like New Zealand. New Zealand has a specific statute which deals with people who incite, instigate, provoke another person to take their lives via online media communication. So maybe what we can do is recommend to the government, okay, if you wish to consider decriminalizing it, but yet holding those who incite it or abet it responsible, have a separate statute, aka revise the law, have a special statute to cater for the prosecution of these people.
So, what Malaysian law says and what it should say is up for debate. And it's a debate that's happening now. So make your thoughts known to policymakers. But the one thing we can do is be more sensitive towards people who might be at risk of suicide.
I think it's very important to understand that there are factors that can protect one from suicide. Social and psychological factors. So a very supportive social environment, as well as moral deterrents to suicide in our culture. And of course, if one knows how to access help, that can be a very protective factor. Literature also tells us that restriction of lethal means of suicide is one of our most effective suicide prevention strategies. So that's a very important thing to consider, as well as safe portrayal of suicide-related content in the media.
People facing mental health issues could be in a place where suicide seems like the only option. The least we can do is show a little kindness and offer our help. Even a listening ear could go a long way. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Did you check out our previous episode on the Harpan coin and cryptocurrency? Shout out to the comment of the week from Azad bin Hamza. Thanks for decryptizing the cryptocurrency issue. Now that's a good one. For the rest of you, please do go and check it out and let us know what you think. If you have any suggestions on what we should do, drop it in the comments below.